Are you a professional woman in Central New York looking to connect with a community that values local talent? Unlock your career's potential with the CNY Women's Network online business directory. For just $9 a month, you can enjoy a premier listing that connects you with a community of engaged customers, recruiters, and executives eager to discover you. Getting started is easy. Simply click the link in the show notes to purchase your listing, and your profile will be live within 72 hours. And one more thing, as a valued listener of the Cultivate CNY podcast, you get 20% off your first month with us. Just use the code Cultivate20 at checkout. That's 20% off your first month with the CNY Women's Network online business directory when you use the code Cultivate20 at checkout. Don't miss out on the opportunity to grow your career and attract new opportunities. Join the CNY Women's Network directory today to be seen, connected, and hired. Hello and welcome to Cultivate CNY. This week's guest is a trailblazer in our community and an inspiration to so many women across Central New York. She is a board-certified forensic pathologist, an accomplished author, and the former chief medical examiner of Onondaga County. With a career dedicated to uncovering the stories and circumstances around death, she brings a unique perspective to the world of forensic science and storytelling. In this episode, we discuss her new book, Autopsies, and why she is dedicated to demystifying death. So that being said, let's welcome Mary Jumbelic to Cultivate CNY. Mary Jumbelic, welcome to Cultivate CNY.
Thank you, Alex. I'm honored to be here. I'm very impressed with everything that you're doing with Central New York Women's Network.
It's been really rewarding work. I've had an absolute blast doing it too because it's a pretty fun gig. So I'm so grateful, and especially grateful that I get to sit down and have really interesting conversations with people like you. I mean, I can just tell you are a creative and you have a creative side, but you've spent a majority of your career in a very scientific, role. But I can see how storytelling and, just using the creative parts of your brain definitely played a role into your career.
I agree. I did spend 25 years doing autopsies and writing reports and doing academic papers and that type of thing. But in the end, I was telling a story every time about what happened to the person, explaining it to their family in a way that was less uh, removed so that they could understand the process. So translating that, if you will, from scientific jargon to human speak, and that process is telling a story. So that framework was there, and I've always liked writing.
Yeah, you do a lot of it now, but how did you find yourself, coming into the position of former chief medical officer of Onondaga County?
Well, as chief medical examiner, I had a lot of paperwork and writing, whether it was for court or for reports or to help people prevent fatalities from happening. So recognizing dangers, public health announcements, that type of thing. But the creative part of it always has been within me. I had a diary when I was 13, and I continued writing journals all the way up through all my mass disaster work. I had a journal at every mass disaster that I attended. And it wasn't for a purpose, it was to record my thoughts, to write descriptions of the environment. And I felt creative doing that, and it was helpful to me processing everything I'm seeing and doing. And then I have stacks and stacks of journals. And after I retired and I had my own sort of bout with death, which is in the book under the chapter Prague, um, I wanted to capture that experience. And so I wrote it and I submitted it to AARP Huffington Post Memoir contest. I had seen in a magazine on an airplane. It was just random, really. And then it came in the top 10, and it was somewhat of a boost. Like, okay, you do have a voice. Maybe you need to refine it, you need to follow it, but you have a voice and it does resonate. So then I started writing stories and going to the Downtown Writers Center and taking classes and doing writers' conferences and all of that, honing my craft so that when I started submitting stories to literary journals and they were rejected and then accepted and then rejected and then accepted, but I began to build up a volume of stories, and suddenly I realized there's a book in me, that it was more than the independent stories.
And you had spent your entire life keeping track of your own stories, which I'm sure helps, and went into the process of creating a book, which is essentially a memoir of your life, centered around the theme of death. So tell us a little bit more about the book, Here Where Death Delights.
So it is a memoir, and I wrote it from about the age of, it follows me from about the age of 13 up until the pandemic time. So it's quite comprehensive, but it's through a particular lens, and that lens is understanding death and dealing with death. So the stories are selected with that idea in mind. And it is interspersed with cases that caused me to really think or feel in that realm, and then also my own personal stories. And it's not all hard hitting, you know, terrible, sad cases, although they definitely are within my book because they cause us to look at humanity. But it also has lighter moments of family time and softer times, with children and my husband and my life, because that is more of a realistic picture. I think sometimes within the forensic world, there's that true crime tell all, uh, splashy blood and gore and guts. And we gravitate to that as a society. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. It's a catharsis in a way for us and all of that. But a lot of times the forensic professionals are unidimensional, or they are simplistic, where they have the focus on the science and that's all they can do, and their relationships are all messed up, and they're divorced or alcoholic, or they have a drug addiction or gambling problem, or they can't form friendships. It feels like we narrow that person down into this little cubby of all they can do is their forensics, and the rest of their life is a mess, as if that's the only kind of person that can deal in that environment. And I just felt my book offered a different view of that it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's really hard, but it's also really rewarding if you take the time to try to understand death.
It's also really important too, I think, to understand and acknowledge death, as it's obviously going to be a part of all of our experiences. Having your career in forensics, you are no stranger to death. But I mean, I have a good friend that can't even talk about it. There's so much anxiety and fear there. Why do you think it's important that people, acknowledge death, accept death? How do you think that plays a role in how we live our lives?
Well, I think that in Western society, and particularly American society, we've kind of distanced ourselves from death and tried to put it at arm's length. And it's something that happens, but we don't want to really think about it. And even if it does happen, we want to pretty it up and, make it palatable. And I think that does a disservice because it really is an integral part of life. You know, I know that I've spent a long time looking at it, but even so, even if you sort of subtract my career out, I've still experienced it. My father died when I was 13. My mother died when I was, in my 40s. Um, I have experienced the loss of friends and known about other community members that have died, that it has been tragedy. So even removing my forensic lens, I've experienced a lot of death in my nearly 68 years of life. By my profession of looking at it, it has helped me deal with all of that, because when we look at death and we really are honest about it, we're honoring the person's life. So whatever happened before and now it's over, we're by really acknowledging what happened to them, we're honoring many, many years before that. And we're also saying, okay, this is an awareness I need. I need to pay attention to this because it might happen to me, it might happen to a loved one. So it has caused me to every day be grateful, and that sounds so, I guess, Zen and, Buddhist, but and in a way it is, but it has caused me to be grateful that I wake up. It's not a given any day. It's not a given when we get home at night from whatever our social activities are, or work activities. And to kind of have that awareness at the same time of hope for the future and hope for the next day and plans for, everything, you live with both of those things and you try to integrate it into your life. And I think it makes for a more aware and more satisfying life.
Hey everyone, I want to take a moment and tell you about an incredible community that's making a real difference for women in Central New York. Are you a growth minded woman looking for a supportive and dynamic community? Look no further. The Collective by CNY Women's Network is built on core values that foster personal and professional growth, ensuring you have the support you need to succeed and live your best life. In the Collective by CNY Women's Network, we celebrate women's successes, collaborate on community initiatives, and create our own opportunities. We're committed to making Central New York a more dynamic and prosperous place to live and build our legacies. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a professional, or someone that's just looking to connect with like minded women, this community is here for you. It's a platform where women are seen, feel connected, and can make their dreams come true. Join the Collective by CNY Women's Network today and become a part of a community that's all about empowerment, growth, and making a positive impact. To join, you can visit cnywomensnetwork.com/join for more information and use the code Cultivate10 at checkout to get 10% off your first month or year with us. That's Cultivate10 at checkout to get 10% off your first month or year with the Collective. So join the Collective by CNY Women's Network today, and your journey to success will be celebrated and supported every step of the way. So last year, right around this time, I had what is now one of my favorite aesthetic treatments done, and I have to tell you guys all about it. So I remember scrolling Instagram and coming across a post from a local woman-owned business that showed a gnarly-looking device hovering over a patient's face, and the caption read something along the lines of, "Now that boat season is over, get rid of the sun damage with our laser facial." I had heard of laser facials before, but I wasn't totally sure exactly what they were for. Then I saw the after photo of this business's patient, and I was shocked. Of course, I had to try it for myself, so I booked myself an appointment at Medicine-Based Beauty and never looked back. Medicine-Based Beauty is your go-to clinic for medical-grade aesthetic services that blend art and science. They offer Botox, fillers, laser treatments, microneedling, and wellness therapies. And they have highly trained professionals that tailor each treatment to enhance your natural beauty. With locations in Ithaca and Syracuse, Medicine-Based Beauty ensures safety and exceptional results for every client. Are you ready to start your beauty journey? Schedule your appointment today by visiting their website at medicinebasedbeauty.com or calling 315-920-0012. Elevate your beauty routine with Medicine-Based Beauty. You will not regret it. Give us an example of maybe one of the profound conclusions you've come to about death through your work and even through your own personal experiences with
Sure.
death.
I think death is always surprising and, life changing when it happens in our personal realm with the people we care about. It can be life changing when it's people that are celebrities or royal or whatever. People take a very shocked and personal reaction to it. So death is unexpected even when we might know it's coming. It's still unexpected the moment that it happens. So that shock, that surprise that we experience can be a catalyst for change in our own lives, for awareness of the other people that are dear and near and still in our lives. I think it's caused me to realize don't lose an opportunity to connect. So if the opportunity is in front of you, try not to put it off. If you have a thought, I don't know, I just thought about Aunt Shirley, call her, or oh, I should write a letter to my friend from college. I've been thinking about her. Send it off. It causes me to be more proactive, kind of in my connections and my relationships.
Yeah, I bet. I'm sure. One of my favorite, like, I don't know if you call it sayings, but it's memento mori.
Yeah,
It's the Latin for
yeah,
remember death.
yes.
I took a philosophy class a few years ago when I went back to school, and that was by far my favorite class. But we talked a lot about death, and I think it was the first time that I kind of re-acknowledged that it is going to happen to all of us. I
Yes.
think when you're young and still figuring it all out,
Yes.
you forget that there's going to be an end to it. But, for me, I think to remember it and to acknowledge it really does mean more gratitude, more presence, more like less control. I think
Yes.
to your point earlier, we try to distance ourselves from death. We try to make it more palatable. I think we try to, I think we live in a world where we have access to so much more control. I think people definitely can be under the impression that they can also control how they die too, right?
Yes. No, I agree with you. I mean, I think there are certain things we do that make sense. They make sense as a society. They make sense for health. So we wear our seatbelts in the car because we've shown that if you don't do that, you have a higher rate of injury and death. We've figured that out. So it doesn't make sense to go, whatever come what may. I'm not going to wear my seatbelt here. Let's just see what happens. So there are certain things we do that we have control over that we can reduce our risk of death. I cross at intersections with lights. I don't, jaywalk across the street. Um, there are things that feel good that we know, okay, I'm not taking a risk here. The reward, what's the reward? Freedom. It feels like kind of silly in that circumstance. But also that fear of death might keep us from, kind of enjoying perhaps, life. So it's good to, follow your health and your weight and your muscle tone and, make sure you get enough water in the day and you have a balanced diet, but we really can't control, I mean, we may think we do, and we do a lot in terms of perhaps, bargaining with ourselves about that. But I say try to enjoy, what's in front of you and everything in moderation, and you really have a lot less control than you think. This is like a little interesting point to that, but I used to be when I was younger afraid of flying. I think it's not an uncommon fear. People get nervous before they fly and, they have no control. They feel they have control in their car. It's just a sensation, but they feel they have control, but they feel when they're in an airplane that it's so scary and it's so beyond that, they could fall out of the sky. And then I did a few air crashes. Where I had to respond to the disaster, and there were hundreds of people dead and from an air crash. And it cured my fear of flying because it made me realize as I looked into the investigation and I'm working with the NTSB and, what happened, that it was, a confluence of things that happened. Maybe a little pilot error, but then there was also something wrong, on the runway. There was also something wrong on the plane. It was all these things came together in a perfect storm that then caused the crash that you realize there's absolutely, no control, and that it could happen that minute versus, the minute when you're, crossing the street. So it kind of relaxed me as far as, you know, giving up that sense of control.
And I think it's funny how you mentioned like we feel more at control in our cars than we do in a plane, but the statistics are there. There's more fatalities caused by car accidents than there are by plane crashes in a
Yes.
year.
Yes.
But, I think we have so much access to information and convenience where
Hmm.
we are kind of, I think we're a little full of ourselves and we do think that we have control over a lot more than we actually do. Also, I'm quite surprised that working on those cases actually cured your fear of flying. I feel like it would kind of do the reverse. Do you think that garnering a little bit more knowledge or maybe just experience with death has helped you overcome your fears?
I think absolutely. I've seen death in so many of its forms, and I've demystified death for the people around the dead. And that interpretation, that analysis, like really looking at it, helps. I have seen it in all its varieties. I know the levels of which I have a modicum of control and which I have no control. I know the marathoner who eats vegan who died with a blockage, of the left anterior descending coronary artery. I've seen that. I've also seen the unhealthy lifestyle, not eating the right things, dying young of a coronary blockage as well. I've seen the spectrum. I've seen the accidents. I've seen the tragic suicides. And I've looked at each of those cases. And so by looking at that, I know death is there. It's in the backdrop of all of our lives, whether we want to look at it or not, it's there. And by looking at it, it's like, I see you. Yeah, I know what's happening. I'm going to enjoy what I have right now. You know, I'm really going to grab it and enjoy it. And my children and my husband and my friends and my family. And take the opportunities. Yeah.
And also, I'm sure it's a bit freeing in a way because there's a lot of things I think that aren't that serious. Living every day with that in mind, feeling more grateful for your loved ones, and just for the fact that you get to live in this moment is huge.
It is huge.
So let's talk about autopsies.
Okay.
Walk us through a typical autopsy. I know every single one is very, very different, but what does that look like? Like, how do you start the process of one?
It's like a surgical protocol, really, just on a deceased individual, but it starts with being aware of the call that came in, and the death. So it's important to garner as much information before, cutting open the person as you can, because just like if you walk into a doctor's office, you give a history. Hi, I'm feeling upset. My stomach hurt. It's been going on for 2 days. The doctor wants to know, your experiences. So in a way, that's what we do with the dead. What happened? They were found on the floor. They've been feeling ill for a couple days. So every bit of information that we get from the scene, from the medical records, is important because it's giving us some framework. And then the autopsy itself begins with the outside of the body examination. So we take time, head to toe, front and back, looking at the skin, looking for scars, looking for injuries, looking for any changes from the, typical, um, including what they're wearing, their clothing, personal effects in their pockets. Maybe they went to a bar and there's a bar stamp on the hand from the night before, or they went to some event and there's a wristband, or all of that, goes into the autopsy. And then we do the scientific process of the internal examination. So make an incision, shoulder to shoulder, meeting in the middle at the breastplate, carrying it downward and opening the body up. And so we do that Y incision and opening the body up. And it's really very standard in terms of everything we look at. So we remove the chest plate. We need to look at all the organs because we want to know if they're healthy or not. We want to know if they're injured or not. So the heart and the lungs and the liver and the kidneys and all of that, piece by piece, weighing it, cutting it, looking at it carefully. And then the head as well, because the brain is part of the autopsy. So a separate incision is made on the skull and removal of the skull. And look at the brain. Is there trauma there? Is there any disease, visible there? And once we have all that information, we also collect body fluids for toxicology testing, poisons. We may do specialized microscopic sections so we can look at it under a microscope and look at the cellular detail, not just how it looks to our naked eye. Is there changes in the liver? Is there hepatitis? Is there fatty liver, cirrhosis? So all of that. And that just requires a lot of knowledge at the front end of knowing what is normal and not, and knowing what you're seeing and not. And it requires a lot of experience to get to that point. But it's a very worthwhile process because in the end, then you have the data from the scene, you have the data from the outside of the body, you have the data from the inside of the body. And you can say, to the family, this is what I think happened. And a lot of times, families are appreciative of that. And then sometimes when they say no, they didn't want an autopsy and then it didn't happen, they're still struggling 20 years later to understand what happened. So I see it as a very worthwhile medical procedure that can answer a lot of questions and should be viewed with that level of professionalism.
You were the first woman to hold the position as chief medical examiner for Onondaga County,
Yes.
and you've been recognized as a trailblazer too.
Yes.
So tell us about your experience with that. How did it feel being the first woman to hold that position?
It felt good. I've always been a very driven person since my youth, and I've operated in a man's world for many decades. It's great to see now there are a lot more women in forensic pathology. In fact, the two full-time staff at the current medical examiner's office are women. And at one point, the health commissioner, the head of the toxicology laboratory, myself, and the county executive were all women, and we were on the letterhead. And it was like a moment of like, wow, we've arrived. That being said, my book reflects this. There were a lot of struggles. There were a lot of headbutting. It was a difficult process at points, being a woman. But I always felt like Mary Jumbelic. So, it was like, okay, we're going to get there. Just this inner fortitude. But my second book, I'll just bring up. I'm writing a second book, and it also is in the same style. So it's memoir. It goes between case studies and my life, and it's not the lens of death, although obviously death plays a large role. It is through the lens of violence against women and how I began to see myself as a strong woman through all of this experience and my grappling with that idea of being a woman. So that's my second book, which touched upon it as what you said. So,
Wow, I'm gonna definitely give that a read once it's available.
yeah.
What has your process been? I know that you've been keeping track of these diary entries, and what is the process of writing a memoir? Because I think it's fascinating, and I actually read a lot of memoirs and autobiographies too.
Hmm.
So yeah, walk us through the process, what that's been like for you.
It was very hard at first because my sense of storytelling was I wanted to talk about the dead and the cases. And that's where I started, and so I wrote that one story that was my life story, and then I backed off from it, and I started just writing about cases that were the ghosts were still living in my head, and I wrote about them. And the more I wrote about them, the more readers or other writers in my groups and in the classes would say, "Yeah, where are you with this? Where's Mary?"
Hmm.
And I'd be like, No, no, I'm not important. You don't understand." They go, "No, you are the story. Like, I don't know why you're, why you're not appearing kind of here." And then as I got more courage to put myself in the story and really how I was seeing it through my eyes, as opposed to distancing myself with just descriptions of what was happening to the dead person, the more that happened, the more real it became for me, and the more I got the courage to continue telling my story and why my story was important. And the dead were helping me. They were, instead of being the complete focus, they were the assistant. They were assisting me in telling my life story. And then that became very good for me once I could let that happen. And the process of choosing stories, like we all have so many stories inside of us. I really believe every person has a story and a book, but it is a lot of work. So I had to hone my craft. I couldn't just write what I wanted and then expect it to be interpreted. I had to work at it and work at it, and that process was rewarding. But how I choose the stories, sometimes they just come to me like a muse, or yeah, it literally can be almost anything. Some environment reminds me of something. Some book I read reminds me I wanted to talk about that, or I'll just be so inspired that the first line of the story pops into my head, and then I just go from there. And they never end up where they start. There's a lot of work going between what I just let come out as a story and then how I shape it ultimately. And some stories don't make it. I think they're going to be good for whatever. And then I go, nah, it doesn't fit. Like I have a few stories that are surfacing now in my second book that they just didn't have a home. They didn't feel like they had a place in my first book, but they resonate somehow in my second book. So I keep them on the side. I keep them in folders, and sometimes they resurface, and sometimes they never make it. But that's okay.
But that's just the life of a writer,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Do you have a specific writing routine, maybe like a sacred time of the day where you love to write, or is it just completely intuitive and just kind of
Um,
moves through you?
I do go by energy level. So like mornings, I have more energy than evenings. That being said, I've been known to have a thought after dinner where I have to go up to the computer and, pound it out because it's just burning in my mind. I do like to set aside a time. Like I did my own, I was selfish and did my own little writer's retreat, like just me. And I went to like a lake house for a week and I just wrote, and it was very satisfying. I never allowed myself to do that before because I have a nice house. I have cozy rooms in my house. I have my office. I don't need another environment, but it did carve out a space for me
Hmm.
to allow me to say, okay, this is my time when I'm going to focus on my craft, and that was really healthy to do that this past summer. But otherwise, I've got my office really cozy, how I like it. And I have a lot of tea. I like the choices of teas that I have, so I can say, okay, I'm going to need a cup of tea now, and then come back and revise this story.
What's your go-to tea?
I think ginger, organic ginger lemon,
Yep.
love it,
Yep. Me too.
just love it. The aroma
Hmm.
and the taste.
Well, that sounds like a ritual to
Yeah.
me, right?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
that cup of tea tells you
Yes.
it's time to write.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also going back to how you indulged yourself
Hmm.
in that, week stay at a lake house. There's so many CEOs that do that,
Hmm.
just creatives in general, people that need to be extremely strategic and creative. There really is something to taking yourself out of your everyday environment, putting yourself in another beautiful space.
Yes.
And, I've done it myself, and there's just nothing like it. The creative juices flowing constantly, that, true feeling of like just it's just you. You know what I mean? You're just coming back to yourself. There's no other responsibilities or obligations to distract you. So,
Exactly. There's none of the home duties, just the daily stuff that
yeah.
we all do, you know?
Well, you said you did
Yeah.
something selfish, and
Yeah.
I see it, for the role that you're playing and the impact that your work is going to make on the world. Like, it is your obligation. It
Mm.
is it is vital to your mission to do things like that. So,
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, that's empowering. I feel that it was good, and I did they had, like, meditation and yoga, stretching, like, classes in the morning at this
mhm.
particular venue. And I said to myself, okay, I'm just going to do that so that I like start my day and I can just, then, go back to the room and, sit on the patio, whatever. And I had no idea when I did that, that the experience I would have, it like blew a whole story into my head from doing that. And I wouldn't have anticipated that at all. I wouldn't even see how meditation would lead to a story that would now make an appearance in my new book. But there it was. There it was in full glory in my head. So it did teach me also not just carving that space out, but I had a new experience that was very stimulating and created a new thought process for me. So that was very worthwhile.
That's a really cool point. I think trying new things can show us a new side of ourselves, but I think it can almost, in a way, like reignite something that is very much there that we don't tap into often.
I agree, and I think what you're doing with the CNY Women's Network and the novels at night the other night which for those of you that don't know was a very nice experience of women socializing and reading combined in a nice bar rooftop atmosphere. I got home from that and wrote a story of the current experience there, and it morphed into my being lettered in library club back in high school and being at an all-girls Catholic school and my sisters in school and in the library. Somehow the experience of being in the reading environment on the rooftop with the other women just led me back to that memory, and so it was really quite lovely. That is how I processed it. So I agree. New experiences and putting yourself out there can lead us to reinterpret or even remember things from our past that have meaning and that may be a little dim or we're not thinking of them.
If someone wants to start their own process of writing
Hmm.
and journaling, what would you recommend for them, especially for someone that just hasn't garnered that habit yet?
Sure. I think Stephen King said it best, I guess. Read a lot and write a lot. It's I think that is where I started was with reading. I mean, I did have a journal at 13, but I had been a reader from, first grade. Everything. Read everything. Don't limit yourself. If it appeals to you to read a classic, it appeals to you to read nonfiction and historical, romance, like just read it all because you're absorbing how people use language. How do we put words together? How do we tell a story? What kind of stories do you like? Uh, and you read it and you go, oh, yeah, that resonates with me. Why does that resonate with you? Is it the character development, the plot, the description of the scene? What is it? And the more you read, you're building up your own library of vocabulary, of storytelling. And then, writing, journaling can be cathartic. It can be just getting our emotions out on paper of an experience, or it can be a telling, more like historical. That if our children were to read it, it's more like, here's where my life was at that point in time. If it's important to you because you feel like you want to communicate your story, then you can do all kinds of things with that. You can take writers classes, start small, memoir class or some other writing class. And you can also do things. There's a Storyworth, I think it's called. My boys gifted this to me like a couple years ago, and it's a company that they choose questions. The whoever buys it for you chooses like 52 questions, and you get sent once a week a question, and then you answer it, like a paragraph, a page, whatever the heck you want. And at the end of the year, they put a book together and they send it to you. So it's kind of an easy way to start. It's like it's opened a little door, I think, for people that where do I even start with like
Mhm.
how do I write my life story? Well, somebody asks you a question and you try to answer the question and then it comes out as a book. Now maybe that seems superfluous since I have a memoir, I'm writing another memoir and whatever, but it was fun for me because it was things they wanted to know. If you were stuck on a desert island, what would be the one food you would choose? And I had to think about that, and I had to create something engaging about, macaroni and cheese. Um, so,
That's a good
so,
one.
so, I'd say if you want to write, just write and read, and then if it becomes important to you, that you want to make it better, then you take classes, and join writers groups. And there's so much available now online that like didn't exist,
Mhm.
20 years ago. Groups and, Facebook groups of writers helping writers and memoirists and there's so much available that I'd say just, try to grab it. Yeah.
Well, I do know that you are very involved with many different things happening here in Central New York. So, what are some of the groups or resources that people can check out if they are interested in becoming an author themselves?
The Downtown Writer Center is part of the YMCA. They do a tremendous job. They have a lot of poets and memoirists and fiction writers that teach classes, and it's online, and some are in person, and they go by semester. There's a fall and a winter and a spring and a summer, maybe 4 to 8 weeks, in length. But that is where I started, as a student, and it was so helpful to me
Hmm.
because it's scary to put yourself out there, and any artist to put yourself out there, because then people are seeing your words, your work, and maybe it's not very good. You don't know.
It's a vulnerable
It's
thing to do.
vulnerable. You make yourself vulnerable, but you have to do that. I think that's if the goal is you want someone to read what you've written, then that you have to go through that painful process, because otherwise you can certainly just write for yourself, and that's totally an option, and I applaud that. I did that for many years. But if you want to take that next step to have a reader, it requires a transition, you know, an acceptance of the vulnerability, criticism, learning, honing, moving forward. And the Downtown Writer Center is just a great place to start as a new writer. Some of the other writers groups kind of didn't survive COVID as well, but there's a lot more available online, for classes too, whether it's through Masterclass or Readsy or Writer's Digest. There's all kinds of groups that, have online classes. And then there's writers' conferences that are always happening, in various cities. Philadelphia has a big one, Santa Fe, so you can, look for like those opportunities or those things. And at a minimum, you can find someone else that's like-minded with you that maybe I sometimes I have a couple friends that I used to schedule writing sessions with, and we would just go like to a coffee shop and chat for a few minutes and then write, like do our own thing.
Hmm.
But it was like almost an accountability thing. Oh, okay, I'm going to go write now for like an
Yeah.
hour and a half.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's
A lot of
helpful
people
too.
need that.
So if you find a friend that, hey, I write too, you schedule something like that, it helps keep you moving forward, because we can all get, in a slump of, "Oof, I don't know what I'm going to write next.
Yeah.
I don't even want to look at what I just wrote. So we need that little push, little push.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
especially if you want to pick up that habit.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to make a change when you have community around the thing you're trying to
Yes.
change.
And libraries are a great place to go too, because I used to just sometimes say, okay, I'm just going over to, DeWitt, because I could look out the big windows and
Yeah, it's beautiful.
so beautiful. And it was contemplative, and people aren't, talking around me. And so, you know, you don't need to do a retreat per se. You can like do these little mini, like out of your environment into like a different environment to get inspired or to just have peace and quiet
Hmm.
and work on it.
How important is it for entrepreneurs and small business owners to kind of start honing their writing skills and their voice? Because I do think, I mean, I've seen everywhere, especially in the thought leader space, a lot of entrepreneurs who want to develop their personal brand end up leaning into the thought leader space too.
Yes, yes.
And all I've seen is you need to start writing. You need to become a
Right.
great writer to do this.
I mean, it's a double-edged sword, I guess, with social media, because it's like we want to get sound bites out.
Yeah.
We want to get them out quickly. We want to be punchy. And sometimes there's not a lot of thought in the language. It could be more sophisticated. It could be not as redundant.
Hmm.
And I'm not an ad person or a PR person. So, I'm kind of speaking out of my area of expertise. I'm just speaking from the writer in me that feels like that world could use a little bit more finesse and
Yeah.
honing and education about,
A little bit more refining.
yeah, of the vocabulary and you know it's so exciting, exclamation point.
I think
Yeah.
in a way that sort of language is starting to have the opposite effect that
Yeah.
it's trying to have.
Yes.
Um, I also think with AI now, something that's overly positive that you're reading. It's
Uh-huh.
so exciting! Exclamation point. It's you I think our brains are starting to become allergic to that in a way where we're like, this isn't a human talking. This is AI. And even if it is a human writing that, right? I think it's really interesting to how important it is to understand how language is being consumed and all of the things. What are a couple pointers would you say? Maybe some do's and don'ts when it comes to writing on social media.
I guess I would like to see it evolve a little bit more sophisticated language. People will absorb it. It's just like I use big words in my book. It's not all through every sentence, but I'm not afraid to like use a sophisticated word because it does explain whatever it is I'm trying to get at. It's the best word for that. Um, so not to be afraid of that, not don't overuse it, because you put people off, but use it in a way that is a little challenging, maybe it is a little challenging. And to take care with like the message that you're putting out, it doesn't have to be an ad for, McDonald's, it doesn't have to be that level of simplicity of,
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
You
you
don't, it
just want to,
doesn't,
you just want to punchy and get
yeah.
it. Okay, there's a punchy aspect. Yes, it's nice to have a nice title of something that resonates. But I think we're moving toward wanting a little more depth with what we're consuming, as opposed to, oh, we're eating potato chips, and
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of a movement to no, I want a little, this to be a little deeper,
Hmm.
you
A
know.
little bit more like intellectual
Yes, yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
And yeah, I think in a way, social media, at least a lot of the people that are really concerned about virality, and from a marketing perspective, I do know like the simpler the better. Like
yes,
people are dumbing things down and kind of watering things down a little bit that should be a little deeper, do you
yes.
think?
I think there's a place for all that spectrum of engagement. Like you have an event coming up with like a little punchy name or like or hook. That's great. I think that's great. It's when we start getting a little more, in depth. We're writing a paragraph, let's say, about something. We want it a little, I don't want to just have it be like it was so great and I'm so appreciative. It's a very, interesting and
Yeah.
I'd like to see that elevated. Like,
A little bit more like specific
yes,
reasons why it
yeah,
was so great, right? Adding that
yes,
kind of human
yes,
aspect to it.
yes. I think the human aspect's important. And I think my book resonates with people because of the specificity of the stories. It's not just, it was really hard. I worked for 25 years with death and it was really bloody and difficult and I was very tired and it was hard. No, I put you at the World Trade Center when I'm standing there with the dust
Mhm.
and the confetti coming down from the fire still. That is what hits people. It's that specificity. It allows, oddly enough, even though it's so specific, it allows the person to feel the universality of that by that example. And so the more we try to make it general, the less it resonates because it doesn't feel real, you know?
So, how do you feel about everything happening with artificial intelligence right now and how it's going to affect the writing space?
Yeah, I mean, it's already affected, the writing space. There are people that use it in marketing and in, brochures and that sort of thing. And I'm sure for some maybe inexperienced writers, it can help or it can be a little push of challenge,
Mhm.
to make their writing better. So, and I've always believed that technology is going to happen. Like life is going to go on. Like
Mhm.
this is it. Like we can't like stand here and bemoan. It's here.
Yes.
We're living it. Like
Mhm.
get on. Move on,
Yeah.
and hopefully guide it and massage it and contain it. But there have been some writers where AI has written like another memoir of theirs and like sort of copied it, and then created it on Amazon. And so some writers have to be very vigilant about that there's a copy, and it might be called, similarly, or it might just be their name, on the front cover, and it sort of slips through. And so writers are complaining about that, that their work is being, and they, as soon as they like notice it and then alert people and it gets taken down and everything. But it's that whole process that's like, it's disconcerting,
Oh, yes. Yeah, it
when
almost
that
kind of
happens, that your work's being copied, and, you know, and
yeah.
it's not even you, and you don't even know what the words are that are in it, that the
Yeah.
AI has generated. So that's disconcerting for writers. Writers do this thing sometimes where they write a paragraph and then they have AI write a paragraph and then they put it out and they say which one's which. And at this point, anyway, you can tell
Yeah.
which the human wrote and which the AI wrote. But I don't know that that will always be the case
Mm.
because it's evolving. You know,
Yeah, for sure. It's
yeah,
getting smarter. It
yeah,
also can like
getting smarter.
depends on what you
Right,
use, but you can recognize
right,
how you prefer to write. Over time, it can store that
right.
memory.
And I don't use it. Not like I wouldn't use it, or I don't have any
Yeah.
reason to like.
It's a great way, I think, to
It,
get started,
yeah, I think
especially if you don't know how to get started. I think it can provide a little bit of framework for you to get started with, right?
right.
But yeah.
And it has a tendency to sound like social media, in the sense of
Yes.
like AI it gets redundant,
Yes.
and repeats concepts or rewords it sentence after sentence, um, sort of like when you're trying to write a college essay and you just can't think of anything else to say. So you just kind of keep regurgitating the thought.
Yep.
At least that's what it reminds me of. It reminds me of like that era of
It
life.
does. I know what you mean.
Oh, yeah, it's like it was so wonderful, when I went to the shore. The shore was just a beautiful place that I enjoyed being at, and it was fun that there was a beach and a shore, and yeah, I just go, "Oh my gosh, golly." Uh, but I think it's gonna get more sophisticated. It's
Yeah.
learning, it'll be like, there'll be input of, "This is too redundant," you have to
Mhm.
think of, a new concept, don't repeat the thing. That will happen, and it will evolve. So it's challenging, for the humans to, continue to perfect the storytelling so that they're a step ahead
Yeah.
of the AI.
But I think it's just important in general for us to hone our own writing skills because regardless, AI is not going to be able to get very specific about your own experiences and just still being able to understand how to form a story and how to construct that so it flows
Yes.
is always going to be a skill that we should be
Yes.
honing.
And it existed before the written word, oral storytelling. And a lot of what we carry with us, thousands of years later, originated with oral storytelling. And I'm sure those tellers were sophisticated in their ability to describe characters and set the scene and tell the moral of the tale. Writing allows us to do it and kind of redo it and really perfect it. And I think there is personal growth that comes from doing that. Whatever else the readers appreciate, there's personal growth that comes through that type of storytelling.
Yeah, I bet. I'm sure because you're allowing yourself the space to relive. And I know you mentioned earlier that you got the courage to talk more. Can you explain how you gained more courage and how maybe other people can start
Sure.
really addressing that if they want to write more?
Sure. I think the very first time I ever read a story out loud in a class, I cried. I didn't expect to cry. I I didn't know that was what was gonna happen. I knew it was a very profound story. In fact, it's the story that's the prologue in my book. But as I'm reading it, whatever, the emotions, and I just got choked up, and I thought, "Uh-oh, maybe I'm not ready for this." It was kinda like a not sure, but, the environment was very supportive, and it was like, "That's good. Maybe you do need to, you know, like work on it like a little bit more. No, it wasn't a criticism. They all let the emotion, happen, but they gave some good feedback, which is sometimes it's too close. You haven't distanced yourself a little bit from it. It is hard, very hard to like say it out loud. So I began doing things like I'd read it out loud at home and get through it, before trying to do it in class, or I'd have a family member listen to it, you know my son Joshua is my best critic, and so I'd read it out loud. Got through it, okay, because you have to get to a point where you're vulnerable, but you're not breakable, and that's hard. Because if you have an experience and then you're discouraged because of that experience, then that's sad. So maybe starting something, maybe I like a bit off a little bit much right there at that first story. Maybe I could have started, you know, with something a little less vulnerable,
Mhm.
just to look at the words, or the storytelling. But that wasn't where I was. I was in the mindset of just getting it out there. Um, so I would say, it's step by step. It really is. Everything is incremental and builds on everything else. So, if you have an opportunity, if there's like there are a lot of different like open mic type things. So, you know, taking something maybe that is like a more simple of your writing and then reading it in that environment, people are pretty supportive, in like an open mic environment.
Yeah.
Um, or having a friend group that does that type of thing, is somewhere to start where you could get some, yeah, keep going. Yeah. But you have to be open to criticism too, you know. That's the harder part
Mhm.
of making yourself more humble with the
Yeah.
vulnerability.
You have to be willing to be vulnerable.
Yes, and you have to be willing to change or to grow, you know. So want if I want my work like appreciated, then I need to hear what the reader's experience is because they're
Yeah.
taking their time. They're taking
If
their
y
time.
if you want it to be consumed, right,
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah,
care
if
about
if if
the
I wanna reach people, then I have to care how it's reaching them.
yeah.
And
It's not all about you.
no,
It's
I
not all
mean,
about how you want to tell the story and
yeah,
what you need to get out of it. It's
yes.
also about the reader.
Hopefully it's both,
Mhm.
hopefully I didn't know, to be fair, even with my experience, I didn't know how my book would be received. I don't know that we ever can know that until it's birthed into the world.
Mhm.
So when it came into the world and the feedback I get are from high school students, academics, cozy mystery readers, true crime aficionados, like it's a gamut. And I get that feedback. It's so empowering, that it spoke to me. This story resonated with me. I really liked when you told about, your difficulties in the courtroom. I really enjoyed that tender case, that you had with a man who lost his wife with a tree branch hitting her. When people get back to me with these specific like feedback points and that, it just resonated with them, I feel like, okay, then I did my job as a writer because they are the stories I want to tell. Nobody told me what stories to put in there.
Mhm.
They resonate with me. They impacted my life. They gave me a worldview. But to see it ripple out is very rewarding.
That was very well said. I mean, that's why we all do what we're doing, and that's just the joys of being a creative. So, honestly, I'm so inspired. I have always just imagined that one day I would write a book, probably like a memoir, but I don't have a writing practice whatsoever. I think there's a side of me that is still feels vulnerable, even too vulnerable to write and to remember. But it's important. And I think it's also, I mean, I personally prefer to read memoirs and biographies because I think it's so important to hear about other people's lives
Yes.
and just even understanding history too. There's so much that can be learned. Do you like to read memoirs and
My reading is
autobiographies?
all over the map, honestly. Right now I'm finishing Mary Higgins Clark, who is a mystery writer. She's written like 52 books. And I used to read her back in college. So I hadn't picked her up for a while, but I did because of the novels at night theme.
Yep.
And so I'm finishing that, one of her books. But I also will read everything from nonfiction or a history or memoir. I can't think of the woman's name right off the top, but she is a woman that's living with acute myeloid leukemia, and she wrote a memoir. And that just came out in paperback 2 days ago. And I'm like, okay, that's next up on my list. I want to
Mhm.
see how she approached life. Um,
Yep.
uh, but I also like Stephen King, and I read Patricia Cornwell, and I'm kind of
You're all over
yeah. And
the map.
if I travel, I always like to find something that might be local, or at least maybe set in that environment. So I'm very inspired by that sort of thing. I like having a book that might be connected to the geography of where I'm traveling.
So, when do you plan to have book number 2 out by?
I think in a really optimistic schedule, it would be like May 1st, that
2025.
yeah, 2025. That'd be an optimistic schedule. But I'm like 2/3 through the first writing of it, so it's not like
You're well on your way.
impossible. Yeah, there's just a lot that has to, you get all the stories, and that's the first part, and then you move them around in a million ways,
Mhm.
and then you edit them, and then you edit them,
Yep.
and you edit them.
How
There's
many
a lot of editings
how
that
many drafts did this one take?
oh, well, in terms of significant drafts, probably 4, but a lot more editing in terms of nitpicky repeated words and punctuation and,
Yeah.
copy editing and,
So you were
you know
writer and editor.
I had an editor.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
and I
did
had beta readers,
Okay.
and then I had an assistant editor. So I had yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that whole process of getting a book published because I
Mm.
think that's very insightful too, and I'm sure for first-time publishers, there's a lot that you didn't even know before you got into
Oh,
it.
I had to learn so much. Yeah, I really did. It was super hard. I will say I felt encouraged because I had like 29 stories accepted in literary journals, like before I collated into a book. So I knew there was like um, acceptance and desire out there for the
You're already a
stories.
published writer
Right.
in
So
another.
that helped me then face the daunting task of publishing it. But there's different ways. You can self-publish, you can do hybrid publishing, you can do traditional publishing, and people choose their path based on their life circumstance and experience. So ultimately, I chose self-publishing. It gave me the most control over the product. It gave me the most timely distribution of the product. And I'm not getting younger, so I didn't want to wait 5 years to dither with the agents and the publishers in a market where someone like myself writing a memoir isn't like a top priority. I had to ask myself, well, why am I writing the book? And I want it out there in the world. How do I get there? Okay, I self publish it.
Mhm.
And self publishing, I had to learn a lot. I had to learn about ISBN numbers in the Library of Congress and BISAC categories and how to do acknowledgments. And I need a typesetter. And how do I do all the front matter of the book? Because not just the book and, then the cover. So there were a lot of steps to get there and that but it'll be much easier the second pass. I feel more confident with it on the second pass, but it was a period of growth, learning about, how to get the book published. And to be fair, I didn't know it's a print on demand, book, and I didn't know how many to order even to start with, and I really didn't know what to do after. That was sort of the end for me was the book.
Yep.
And then I
And then
realized
the promotion
right, and
process
then I
is a whole other
realized, "Oh,
beast.
no, I'm on a whole journey now. Wait, no, that was just the beginning."
Yeah.
Uh, So that also I had to learn. That was
That's interesting. I didn't know that there was print on demand for books.
it makes it eminently doable for people.
Inspiring. I was gonna say that's
Because
outstanding.
you can do it, and then I mean, my book sort of then got a life of its own, so I didn't go back and change things. There are a few mistakes in the book. I didn't go back and fix it because it was like on like a trajectory,
Mhm.
and it kind of was the train that it was going. So, but that being said, I got my first case of books, and I also had a library appearance that night because I was doing some library talks just from my career as a medical examiner. People like hearing about that. So it just coincided that I got my first case of books with my library appearance. And I trundle in to the library, and there are people like lined up at the like counter because I think I might have said to the librarian, "Oh, I think my case just came today." Like I said something. And I was just like I was so flummoxed because I hadn't prepared in my head like I'm like signing and selling my books. It was going to be like an afterthought of like I do my lecture, like, and it was just and people were lined up. I sold my whole case. I'm like, oh my god, what is happening right now? It was very off-putting and energizing at the same time. Uh, so that's kind of been the trajectory, and I've gone with it. I've just kind of thrown myself into it. Okay, then just I do this event or that event. I do the next thing, and it's been very rewarding. And people have come up to me from my former life as a medical examiner. Oh, I worked with you back in the day. Do you remember that? Or are you autopsied my sister? And it really impacted me. And
Mhm.
it was very and so I've gotten so much positive feedback that I never expected, from the book, and that has been a whole new reward, like, that was unanticipated, in terms of the connection that I have with people when I do go out and do a reading or,
Yeah.
a book signing. It's very powerful. It means a lot to me.
Yeah, and you know what? Those in-person experiences, those in-person events, like I am sure that those are vital to the success of a book campaign.
Mhm.
Where are you doing your events? Have you done any traveling outside of New York or
I have been to Rochester, and I've been down to Ithaca, and I've been down to Florida because a very nice, woman who's in her 90s, invited me there for her group, and my brother-in-law lives there, so I did like something there, but mostly in the central New York, region. But it has morphed. I mean, I had someone contact me from Australia who bought my book, the UK, multiple states like
wow.
throughout the US. So it's there. It's out there and percolating
Yeah.
in the world.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And you're passionate about connecting and promoting other authors in Central New York.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that, what you have going on, and if there's any authors listening to this, how they can get connected to you.
Well, I did host the you know, Women's Day event in March with the Downtown Writers Center, YMCA, and that was really nicely attended. There were 10 authors that read from their works, local authors, and it ranged from an essay to poetry to, fiction. So that was very empowering. That was really a lovely event. I did a poetry and pride event at Art in the Atrium, and that was poetry, obviously. Again, local poets, reading from their work. So I like to keep community, and I like to encourage, people to participate. And I've done a lot of, co-signings with like libraries might have a day, or a few hours where other authors, local authors. And so those are all really, really nice. Yeah, my website, people can contact me through my website, which is simple. It's my name, maryjumbelic.com. So there's a contact button, and I'm pretty good about responding.
I'm so excited for your second book. I'm going to have to order this one here. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm also going to have to invite you back on the pod so we can talk about the second book because the second book sounds perfect for our
Yeah,
audience. And I definitely want to talk to you about our local women authors here.
sure.
So,
And this book still is growing because I'm doing a Spanish translation.
Really? I
And I'm
love
doing an
that.
audio.
Can
Uh,
you speak Spanish?
yeah, puedo hablar en español bastante bien, but I can't translate it. I'm having someone
Okay.
translate it. That
Yeah.
my level of sophistication for like the translation would not fly. I'm conversational,
Yeah.
but it just felt important to me. I think Spanish is a beautiful language. It taps into my husband's Argentinian, grandfather. And also, I've just had a lot of travel, and we've done missions for surgery in Ecuador, and we have friends in all kinds of places. And even if it has a very low, I'm going to do a paperback, and it'll be not quite as book signings as the current English version, but I want it available. I want it out there in the
Yeah.
world in this form. And the audio, I think, is important because I read a lot of audiobooks, and I use that word very intentionally because there is some element where people say, "Oh, you read the book or you heard the book?" And I go, "No, no, like it's the same. I mean, it's not the same experience, but I absorbed it. I
Yes.
heard it. You know, um, so." Audiobooks are so good for times of, when you just want to listen to the book and you don't have the energy, or you're out in the sun or whatever it is. And so I read twice as much as I would otherwise not be able to do if I just said, "Oh, I'm only going to have the actual printed material in front of me."
Yeah.
So I think audiobooks are tremendously important.
Me too.
And so I'm going to Vermont. There's a studio there. I'm going to
Oh,
record my
beautiful.
book.
You're gonna
And
self-record the
yeah,
audiobook and your own narration.
yes,
That's awesome.
yes,
I was going to ask you that too. I'm like,
yeah,
is there an audio version? But I'll be sure when this episode is published that we're adding all of the links, all of the
yeah.
things so people know where to get your book. And one more question,
Mhm.
as a female author here in Central New York, what is, one thing you hope for our region?
I feel Syracuse is growing and evolving, and I feel a certain electricity and energy uh, happening in the last like year and a half. Post COVID, youthfulness even, to the city, and so I'm excited by that, and I'm excited to participate in women's events because I feel like, sometimes as we age, maybe we feel we're kind of like, I don't know, moving off to the side
Yeah,
a little bit, but I don't think we need to. And I think some of it's self-imposed. Um,
because
it,
just culture.
culture, I think it's a bit self-imposed. And so I'm excited for that and participating in that and encouraging others, to do that.
I think it's important too for you to say that because there's so much that needs to be shared to the younger generation here
Mm,
that is obvious so clearly making themselves seen and known, and they're excited for all of the things happening in Syracuse too. But
yes.
there's such an importance to have diversity there. So we have all perspectives. But I also really liked how you used the word participate. And I think it's important for creatives here in Syracuse to kind of own that they have a duty and they need
Hmm.
and to participate in what's happening here because the only way this region's going to get better and more vibrant is if there is that active participation and people are committed to, letting themselves be seen and sharing their work with the region.
Yes, I agree. And I think there's an opportunity because through my book, you'll see there have been a lot of men who have mentored me.
Mhm.
There's an occasional personal woman like my mother or my next door neighbor, but my world, was that my mentors were men, and I have an opportunity. Now
Yeah.
I- I'm where I am. So I'm there, and I have an opportunity to mentor others, and learn from them as well because I think
Mhm.
it goes both ways. So I'm excited about that participation. Yes.
That's amazing. I love to hear that.
Mm.
That's honestly why I started the CNY Women's Network in general was so because I wanted to find my mentors. I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, a creative, if you will. And I knew that I needed people to look up to and learn
Yes.
from.
Yes.
especially because my career and my education journey has not been the most traditional.
Mm.
So, but I'm also just, I love people and I love hearing people's stories. And I think that there's the most to learn from others and not
Mm.
just, school and higher education, but
Sure.
I love podcasts. I love, biographies and
Mm-hmm.
I love learning from people. So
Yes.
I'm so excited I could sit down with you today and learn about your journey a little bit. And I hope to have you on again soon.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be here, and this has been a very fulfilling conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. All right, guys, that is it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to Cultivate CNY. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you left us a review and make sure you're subscribed to the show. Speaking of the show, if you know anyone or if you are interested in being our next guest on Cultivate CNY, be sure to submit us an application. You can just click the link in the show notes. And if you're a business owner that's interested in getting in front of our audience, you can go ahead and email us at podcast@cnywomensnetwork.com to learn more about sponsorship and advertising opportunities. All right, that's it for now. I'll catch you guys next Monday.